Rain on a wedding dress is not the same as rain on anything else. It is heavier somehow, more final. The silk takes the water differently than wool or cotton. It drinks it in, darkens, becomes something other than what it was made to be. A wedding dress in the rain is not a wedding dress anymore. It is evidence. Anneliese Brow stood on the steps of St. Bartholomew's Church in the village of Hartston on the 14th of September and understood this with the particular clarity that comes when the mind has processed the situation fully and arrived, finally, at the thing that is simply true. He was not coming. The guests had left 20 minutes ago. First the uncertain ones, then the sympathetic ones, then the ones who could not manage sympathy and left out of discomfort. Then, last of all, her mother, who had pressed her hand and said her name twice, and then been guided away by Anneliese's aunt because Anneliese could not manage her mother's grief on top of her own. The vicar had offered to wait with her. She had told him to go inside. She was alone on the steps. The rain came down. She did not move. She was trying to determine what she felt, because she was a person who needed to know what she felt before she could do anything about it. And what she found, underneath the cold and the wet and the humiliation that sat on her skin like another layer of fabric, was something she had not expected. Not devastation, not the end of everything. Something quieter than that. Something that felt, in the most inconvenient and bewildering way, like the very early beginning of relief. She was still standing with this discovery when she heard the carriage slow on the road. The carriage that slowed on the Hartston road was travelling north and had been for 3 hours, and its occupant had been staring at the passing countryside with the focused inattention of someone thinking very hard about something other than what was in front of them. His name was William Calloway. No title, no estate, the second son of a second son, possessed of a modest inheritance and an architectural practice in London that was doing well enough that he had not had to think about money for 2 years, which was the precise duration of time he had spent not thinking about anything else either. He was 31 years old, and he had been in the process of becoming someone who did not feel things too fully, which was a process he had found over 2 years to be considerably more difficult than it sounded. He was not looking at the church when his coachman slowed. He was looking at papers. He looked up because the carriage had stopped and the coachman had said nothing, and the silence had a particular quality. He saw the church first. Small, old, the kind of village church that had been in the same spot for 400 years and intended to stay. The gate was open. The path to the door was scattered with flower petals that the rain was steadily destroying. Then he saw her. She was standing on the steps in a white dress that had been, some hours ago, a wedding dress, and was now something else entirely. She was not crying. She was not moving. She was simply standing in the rain, with her hands at her sides and her face tilted very slightly upward, in the manner of someone receiving something they cannot prevent. William looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened the carriage door. His coachman turned. "My lord." "I'm not a lord," William said, for approximately the 400th time. "Wait here." He walked up the path. She heard him coming, the footsteps on the wet stone, and turned. He saw her face then, up close. Dark eyes, strong features, the particular expression of someone who has been holding themselves together through force of will and is not entirely sure how much longer the will holds. She looked at him with the direct, slightly unfocused gaze of someone in the middle of something enormous. He said, "My carriage is warm and dry. I have a coat and a flask of brandy. I am not a person you know, and I have no expectations whatsoever. But I am here, and you are standing in the rain in September, and that seems like it should be addressed. A pause. That is, she said, with a faint, bewildered quality, a very strange thing to say to someone you've never met. Yes, he agreed. It is the truest thing I could think of on short notice. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked back at the church door, which was closed. Then she looked at the carriage on the road. "All right," she said. She walked down the steps. He fell into step beside her, without touching her, keeping the distance of someone who has offered a practical thing and intends to deliver only the practical thing. And when they reached the carriage, he opened the door, and she climbed in, and he climbed in after her. And the coachman, without being told, clicked the horses forward. He produced the coat. She took it and wrapped it around her shoulders. He produced the flask. She looked at it. "Brandy," he confirmed. She took it. She drank. She handed it back. They sat in the warm, moving carriage and did not speak for a while, and the rain came down on the windows, and outside the village of Heartstone retreated behind them, and the wedding dress dried slowly in the warmth and became, by degrees, simply a dress. "Thank you," she said, finally. "You're welcome." Another silence. "He didn't come," she said. Not to him specifically, simply saying it out loud, completing the sentence that had been unfinished on the church steps. "No," William said. "I had a feeling this morning." She was looking at the window, the countryside moving past, grey and wet and indifferent. "I told myself it was nerves. I have been telling myself things were nerves for approximately 4 months." He said nothing. He had learned, over 31 years of being the person people talked to, that the most useful thing was often simply to be present and not fill the silence. "I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think I knew. I think I have known for some time that something was wrong. And I did not stop it because stopping it felt worse than continuing it. And now," she paused, "now I am in a stranger's carriage, in a wet dress, and it has been stopped for me. And the extraordinary thing is that it does not feel as bad as I thought it would." She turned from the window and looked at him with the slightly disconcerted quality of someone who has just admitted something they had not planned to. "I'm sorry," she said. "You offered me warmth and brandy. You didn't offer to be talked at." "I don't mind," he said, and he meant it. He found, to his own mild surprise, that he meant it completely. "What's your name?" "Anneliese Brow." A pause. "Anneliese nothing at the moment, I suppose. Not Brow for much longer, since I was meant to be someone else today." "You are still Anneliese Brow," he said. "That doesn't change because someone didn't show up." She looked at him. "William Calloway," he said. "Architect. Currently travelling to inspect a project in Yorkshire that will take approximately 3 weeks and will involve a great deal of arguing with contractors about load-bearing walls." Something shifted in her face. The very beginning of something that was not quite a smile, but was its immediate precursor. "That sounds," she said, "considerably more reliable than a church." "Load-bearing walls," he said, "very rarely fail to appear." This time it was a smile. Brief, slightly surprised, real. He felt something shift in him that he had not expected to feel. He looked out his own window and thought, careful. He thought it without much conviction. The carriage went in the end to the next village, Whitmore, 6 miles from Hartston, which had a coaching inn and a fire and rooms that were clean and adequately warm. Anneliese had no money. This was the practical reality that presented itself approximately 40 minutes into the journey, when the immediate shock had settled enough that practical realities could be considered. She had a wedding dress, a coat borrowed from a stranger, and the small reticule she had carried to the church that contained a handkerchief and a single coin. Her mother had the rest. Her mother was back in Hartston, in the house where the wedding breakfast had been laid out, and was presumably still sitting, growing cold. She said this to William with the matter-of-fact tone of someone assessing a situation rather than despairing about it, and he said, "The inn is settled, don't think about it." And when she began to object, he said, "You can send it when you are home, if it matters to you. But at present, you need a room and a fire and something to eat, and those are the things that exist to be dealt with." She did not object further. She was too cold and too tired, and too busy processing the events of the day to perform independence at someone who was, so far, simply being practical. The inn was warm. The landlady, a broad, comfortable woman named Mrs. Finch, looked at Anneliese once and at the dress once, and arranged everything with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had seen things and knew when not to ask questions. A room was produced. Hot water was sent up. A dress was borrowed from Mrs. Finch's daughter. Plain wool, too large in the shoulders, enormously preferable to wet silk. Anneliese came down to the private dining room an hour later as herself rather than as a bride, which was, she thought, a more accurate state than she had been in since approximately April. William was already there. He had changed as well. Travelling clothes, practical, the clothes of a man who moved through the world efficiently and without fuss. He stood when she entered and did not say anything about the transformation, simply gestured to the chair by the fire and poured tea. She sat. She drank the tea. She looked at the fire. "Tell me about load-bearing walls," she said. He looked at her briefly. "Truly? I have thought about my own situation for several hours, and I would like to think about something else. Tell me about the project in Yorkshire." So he told her. He talked about the house in Yorkshire, a manor that had been neglected for 20 years by an absent owner and was now being restored by the man's son, who had inherited and discovered the extent of the neglect and was attempting to address it comprehensively. He talked about the structural problems, which were significant, and the aesthetic questions, which were interesting, and the contractor, who had strong opinions about the roof that were wrong in ways William could demonstrate mathematically, but which the man refused to accept. She listened, with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested, and asked questions, good ones, specific ones, the questions of a person who was thinking about what she was hearing, rather than waiting to respond. He found himself talking for 40 minutes without noticing the time passing. When he stopped, she said, "You love it." "The work?" "Yes." He considered this. "I do. I like the problem of it. The way every building is a puzzle with constraints, and the solution has to work within all of them simultaneously. Structural, aesthetic, practical, financial. The best buildings are the ones where all the constraints resolve into something that feels inevitable." He paused. Like the solution was always there, waiting to be found. She was looking at the fire. "I envy that," she said quietly. "Having a thing that is yours." that you built, that exists regardless of what else happens." "What is yours?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I used to paint," she said. "Before, I used to paint a great deal. Landscapes mostly. I had a studio in my father's house. When I became engaged, there was a great deal of preparation, and the studio became a storeroom. And I told myself I would paint again after the wedding." "Yes." A pause. "Well," he said carefully, "the studio will be available again now." She looked at him. Then, despite everything, or because of everything, because sometimes laughter is the only accurate response to the scale of what has happened, she laughed. A real laugh, full and slightly startled, and it changed her face entirely. And William Calloway sat across the fire from her and felt something he had spent 2 years trying not to feel move through him with the unstoppable quality of a tide coming in. Careful, he thought again. He thought it with even less conviction than before. She was leaving in the morning. This was established and agreed upon. Her mother would have sent word to her aunt in Whitmore by now, and her aunt would come in the morning and take her home. And that was the appropriate and sensible thing. William was also leaving in the morning. The Yorkshire project waited. They ate breakfast at the same table, which was Mrs. Finch's arrangement rather than either of theirs, and talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with the previous day. About architecture and painting, and the question of whether the new industrial towns were producing anything worth preserving for future generations, and a lengthy and productive disagreement about the relative merits of Gothic versus Palladian design. Her aunt arrived at 10:30. Mrs. Hartwood was 60, brisk, and possessed of the particular quality of a woman who has managed difficult situations before and knows the value of not commenting on them. She looked at Annalise with clear, warm eyes, pressed her hand, said nothing about the dress or the previous day, and thanked William with the directness of someone who understood what had been done and considered it worth acknowledging. Annalise stood at the door of the inn. She had returned the borrowed coat, which had been washed and pressed by Mrs. Finch at some point in the night. William was in his own coat, bags already in the carriage, coachman waiting. They stood at the door. "Yorkshire," she said. "Yorkshire," he confirmed. 3 weeks. Approximately. She looked at him. She was, he thought, the most direct person he had met in years. She looked at you as though she was actually looking, which was rarer than it should have been. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping. You didn't have to." "No," he agreed. "Most people would have driven past." "I know." A pause. "Why didn't you?" she asked. He thought about it. The honest answer was, because something in the way she was standing told me that she needed someone to stop. And I was there. And the stopping cost me nothing. And the not stopping would have cost me something I could not name. What he said was, "You look like someone who had been standing in the rain long enough." She held his gaze for a moment. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Miss Brow, if you are ever passing through—" She paused. "I live in Dorset. My father's house is called Brow Park. It is not difficult to find." He looked at her. "I'll remember that," he said. Her aunt was at her elbow. The carriage was waiting. She turned. She did not look back, which was right. Looking back would have made it into something, and it was not yet something. It was only a morning at an inn and a warm carriage and 2 hours of breakfast conversation. But William Calloway stood at the door of the Whitmore Coaching Inn and watched her go, and thought about Dorset, and thought about 3 weeks in Yorkshire, and thought about the precise ways she had laughed at the fire. He got back in his carriage. He told himself, Yorkshire first. He told himself this with the tone of a man who knows what he is doing and is doing it anyway. The Yorkshire project was, as anticipated, a significant argument about load-bearing walls. The contractor was a man named Briggs, who had been in the business for 40 years and who held his opinions with the grip of someone who considers changing his mind a form of personal defeat. William had encountered many Briggses over the course of his practice and had developed a method for them. Demonstrate the mathematics, wait, demonstrate the mathematics again, wait again, and eventually the mathematics became undeniable. He spent 3 weeks in Yorkshire. He thought about Annalise Brow more than was strictly appropriate for a man who had met someone once in unusual circumstances and had no particular reason to see them again. He thought about the way she had assessed the situation on the church steps, the practical clarity of it, the absence of the kind of collapse that most people would have permitted themselves. He thought about the 2 hours of breakfast conversation and the specific quality of her attention, which was the attention of someone who was genuinely interested in the world outside their own experience. He thought about what she had said about the studio. He thought, she has spent 4 months preparing for someone else's life, and now she has her own back, and I wonder what she will do with it. He had no business wondering this. He was aware of that. He wondered anyway. On the 19th day, the contractor conceded the load-bearing wall. On the 21st day, William Calloway packed his bags and told his coachman to take the southern route. His coachman said, "The southern route is considerably longer, sir." William said, "I know." His coachman, who had been driving for him for 6 years and had developed a comprehensive understanding of when questions were and were not welcome, said nothing further and took the southern route. The southern route passed through Dorset. He did not go to Brow Park. He told himself he was simply passing through the county, which was true in the most technical and least honest sense of the word. He stopped in the nearest town for the night, at an inn that was adequate and impersonal, and ate dinner alone, and looked at the fire, and thought about the fact that he had just driven 4 hours out of his way for a county rather than a destination. He slept. In the morning he called for his carriage. His coachman appeared with the expression of a man awaiting instructions. William said, "Brow Park." His coachman said, "Yes, sir." They drove. Brow Park was a Jacobean manor in the Dorset Hills, not large, not grand, but well proportioned and rooted in the landscape, with the settled confidence of a house that knew exactly what it was. The grounds were overgrown in the corners in a way that suggested not neglect, but a loose relationship with formality. And there were roses on the east wall that had not been cut back in several years, and had therefore done exactly as they pleased. William sat in his stopped carriage at the gate and looked at it with the professional eye that he could not entirely turn off, and thought, good bones. Someone loved this house and was not precious about it. That is the best possible combination. Then he got out and knocked. The housekeeper opened the door. She looked at his card. She looked at him. She said she would inquire, in the tone of a woman who would form her own opinion before reporting back, and closed the door. He waited. The door opened again, not the housekeeper. Annalise was in paint-stained clothes, an old dress, clearly a work dress, with cadmium yellow on the right sleeve and a streak of something that might have been umber across the back of her left hand. Her hair was less arranged than it had been at the inn. She looked like someone who had been interrupted in the middle of something. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You came," she said. Not surprised exactly, more like verifying. "I was in the area," he said. "You were in Yorkshire." "Yorkshire is in the general area of Dorset." "It is not remotely in the general area of Dorset." "No," he agreed, "it is not." A pause. She stepped back from the door. He came in. She took him to the studio, which had been, she explained as they walked, a storeroom for the past 4 months, and had been in the process of being unstored for the past 3 weeks, with the focused determination of someone reclaiming something important. The canvases were stacked against one wall. The north light that she described as essential came through the high windows, with the even, clean quality that painters require. The easel was set up in the centre and had a half-finished landscape on it, still wet. He stood in front of it. He looked at it for a long time. It was good. Not good in the polite sense of the word that people used when they meant adequate. Good in the sense of being alive, of having in it the specific quality of a mind that saw things and understood them, and could put that understanding on a surface. The landscape was Dorset. The hills she could see from the studio window, and she had painted them not as they looked in bright light, but as they looked in that particular Dorset September quality of light, which was low and pale, and made everything slightly uncertain, slightly temporary. "This is extraordinary," he said. "It's unfinished," she said. "I know. It's still extraordinary." She looked at the painting with the critical eye of someone who is always closer to the work than any observer can be. "I have been finding my way back to it. It has been 3 weeks, and I am not entirely where I was before." "Where were you before?" "Better than this, more fluent. The hand remembers, but the eye is still—" She paused, looking for the word. "Relearning to look." "The work of becoming yourself again," he said. She turned to him. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." They stood in the studio in the north light and looked at each other with the particular quality of two people who have established, without any of the usual apparatus, that they are glad to be in the same room. "Stay for lunch," she said. He stayed for 3 days. Not in the house. He was at the inn in the village, which was proper and correct, and which meant that each morning he walked up to Brow Park, and each evening he walked back down. And in between he sat in the studio while she painted, and they talked. Or he worked on drawings for his next project at the other table, and they were quiet. And it was the most comfortable 3 days he had spent in 2 years. On the third evening, walking back to the inn in the October dusk, he understood what had been happening and what it meant, and what he intended to do about it. He understood it with the clarity of a load-bearing wall properly calculated, the constraints all present, the solution apparent, the structure sound. He walked back up to Brow Park the next morning. She was already in the studio. He said, "I want to come back." She did not look up from the canvas. "Then come back," she said. "I mean, regularly. Not passing through, not in the area, specifically here, specifically to see you." Now she looked up. "Why?" she said. Not challenging, simply the direct question, the one she always asked. Because, he said, I spent 3 weeks in Yorkshire thinking about 2 hours of breakfast conversation and the way you laughed at a fire. And I drove 4 hours out of my way to be in a county rather than go home. And I have been sitting in your studio for 3 days, finding it the most natural thing in the world. And I think we should find out what this is. She looked at him for a long moment. I was left at an altar 3 weeks ago, she said. I know. I am in the middle of a great deal of reassembly. I know that too. I am not going to be someone's project, she said, or someone's rescue. I have been a project and a rescue attempt in the recent past, and I found it, she paused, confining. I know, he said. I am not offering that. I am offering, he thought about it, a person who wants to sit in your studio while you paint and argue with you about architecture and find out where the breakfast conversation goes. She looked at the painting on the easel, then at him. Come back at Christmas, she said. That is 6 weeks. If you still want to come back at Christmas, come back. I'll be here, he said. You might change your mind. I won't change my mind. She picked up her brush. 6 weeks, she said. He left. He came back in 6 weeks. The village of Heartstone, meanwhile, had formed its opinions. Small villages were efficient engines of narrative. They took the available facts, assembled them into a story, and distributed the story with the speed and certainty of something that had been agreed upon by committee. The story that Heartstone had assembled about Annalise Brow was not unkind exactly, but it had the particular quality of a story that prioritized drama over accuracy. The facts, as Heartstone understood them: Annalise had been left at the altar by George Whitmore, who was the son of a prosperous local family, and who had, it subsequently emerged, departed for Scotland on the morning of the wedding with a woman named Miss Catherine Farley, whom he had apparently loved for 2 years, and had been too cowardly to choose. The discovery of Miss Farley's existence had occasioned considerable rearrangement of sympathies in the village, and Annalise had received, in the weeks following the wedding, enough flowers and sympathetic calls to furnish a second wedding entirely. What Heartstone did not know was the stranger and the carriage. Annalise had not told anyone. She had come home with her aunt and been received with great warmth, and had let the warmth happen around her without amplifying it. And the particular detail of the warm carriage and the brandy and the 2 hours of breakfast conversation and the architect who drove 4 hours out of his way to be in Dorset had remained her own. She kept it because it felt private, because it was the thing that had happened to her specifically, not to the abandoned bride who was the subject of Heartstone's sympathetic narrative. It had happened to Annalise, the person underneath the occasion, and she was not yet ready to share it. She was also, she acknowledged honestly, not entirely sure what it was. She knew what she felt. She was, as she had told William, in the middle of a great deal of reassembly, and one of the things being reassembled was her trust in her own assessments. She had assessed George Whitmore and been wrong. Not wrong about his character, she thought, but wrong about whether his character had scope to change, which was a different and more complicated kind of wrongness. She had told herself things were nerves for 4 months, rather than face what she actually knew. She was determined not to make that mistake again. So she watched herself. She noticed what she noticed, She catalogued it with the same careful attention she brought to the paintings. The specific quality of light on a landscape, the way a shadow changed the truth of a thing. She noticed that when William's letter arrived from London, he wrote every week on Tuesdays in handwriting that was precise and architectural and completely individual. She read it immediately. Not when she had time, immediately. She noticed that when she was working on a painting and reached an impasse, her first instinct was to describe the problem to him, because describing it to him produced useful responses that moved the work forward. She noticed that she had told him things she had not told her mother or her aunt or her oldest friend. Not difficult things, not confessions, just the ordinary private things that you tell someone when you have stopped managing the impression you are making on them. She was still assembling this evidence when Christmas arrived. He came back. He arrived on the 23rd of December, as promised, with a travelling case and a parcel of books he had thought she would want to read, and the easy, undemonstrative manner of someone returning to a place they consider familiar. She opened the door herself before he knocked. He looked at her. "You were watching for the carriage," he said. "I was not watching for the carriage. You opened the door before I knocked. I happened to be nearby. You happened to be in the entrance hall in December." She looked at him with the particular expression she had developed for his accurate observations, which was somewhere between exasperation and warmth. "Come in," she said. "It's cold." He came in. He stayed for 5 days. They walked in the Dorset hills, and she showed him the landscapes she had been painting from life, and he explained the structural logic of a nearby medieval church they passed, and they argued about whether beauty was a function of proportion or something that exceeded it, and she served him dinner in the kitchen because the dining room was cold and the kitchen was not. And they talked until midnight every night with the comfortable fluency of people who had, somehow, arrived at a conversation that did not need warming up. On Christmas Day, he gave her a small book, a collection of essays on landscape painting that he had found in a second-hand shop and that was, she could tell immediately, exactly right, the specific book for her specific interest. She gave him a drawing she had made. It was of his hands. She had been quietly observing them for weeks, the specific quality of them, the way they held a pencil, the particular gesture he made when he was working through a problem. She had drawn them from memory, and they were accurate enough that when he looked at them, his expression did something she had not seen before. "Annalise," he said. "Yes," she said, answering the question he had not yet asked. He looked up from the drawing. "Yes," he said. "Yes," she said again. "I have been assembling the evidence for 3 months, and the evidence is conclusive. Yes." He set the drawing down very carefully on the table, the careful quality of a man handling something he does not want to damage. Then he looked at her with the open, unguarded expression of a person who stopped being careful at the exact moment it mattered most. "Tell me about the evidence," he said. She told him. It took some time. She was very thorough. He told her about his own loss on New Year's Eve. They were sitting in the studio. She had been working earlier, the painting still wet, and he had his drawings spread on the other table. And the evening had settled into the comfortable quiet that was, she thought, one of the things she was most sure of. When he set down his pencil and said, "I want to tell you something," she set down her brush. He told her about a woman named Clara Westwood, who had been his closest friend from the age of 19, and who he had loved in the particular way that you love someone when you do not have the words for it, and are not certain they feel the same, and are therefore never quite able to say the thing. He had been 31 years old before he had. By then, it was too late. "She was ill," he said, "for 2 years. I knew she was ill, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought there was time. I thought the right moment would present itself. I thought I was being sensitive to her circumstances by not adding weight to them. He looked at his hands. I was being a coward. The sensitivity was a story I was telling myself. The truth was, I was frightened, and I used her illness as a reason to keep being frightened. She died, Annalise said quietly. A year ago November. Without... He paused. Without knowing. The studio was very still. I think, he said carefully, that is the thing I have been carrying. The specific weight of the thing I did not say. I have been very careful since then, not to feel things too fully, because feeling things fully led to that. And I did not want to be in the position of having failed someone through my own cowardice again. Annalise looked at him. And then, he said, I was passing through a village in September, and a woman was standing in the rain. And you stopped, she said. And I stopped. He met her eyes. Without thinking, without calculating, I stopped because you were there, and it was raining, and it seemed like the obvious thing, which was strange, because in the previous year nothing had seemed obvious. Everything had seemed very careful and very considered and very managed. She was quiet for a moment. You stopped, she said slowly, because with me you were not afraid. He looked at her with the expression of a man encountering an accurate diagnosis. I think that is right, he said. Yes, I think that is exactly right. She stood. She crossed the studio and sat down in the chair across from his, and looked at him directly with the clear, undefended quality that was one of the things he had been falling for since September. I was going to marry someone I knew was wrong for me, she said, because stopping it felt worse than continuing it. And I have been trying, since September, to understand the difference between caution and cowardice, because I do not want to be cautious about the wrong things. No, he said. I do not want to stand in the rain again, she said, because I did not stop something I should have stopped. No, he said again. So I am going to say the thing I am thinking, she said, which is that I love you. I have been assembling the evidence for 4 months, and it is conclusive, and I have been waiting for the right moment, which is the same thing you were doing with Clara, and I am not going to do that. William Calloway looked at Annalise's brow across the studio table, in the pale winter light of New Year's Eve, with 1 year of carrying something heavy behind him, and 1 year of learning to put it down ahead of him. He said, I love you. I have loved you since approximately the moment you said, load-bearing walls are more reliable than churches. She breathed. That was the first conversation, she said. I know, he said. I told you to be careful. You didn't tell me. I told myself. How did that work out? He looked at her. At the paint-stained dress and the Dorset winter and the studio full of living, breathing work. Poorly, he said. Fortunately. She laughed. He crossed the studio and sat beside her and took her hand with the careful, deliberate quality of a man who has learned the cost of not taking hold of things. And she let him. And the new year arrived outside the window of the studio, unannounced and unremarkable, and everything. He proposed in February, in the studio, in the middle of a disagreement about whether the hills in the painting she was working on were the correct shade of grey. It was not planned. He had planned a proposal, had thought about it in the careful, structural way he thought about problems, had considered the appropriate occasion and the appropriate words. He had a specific evening in mind. He had even, in a moment of perhaps excessive preparation, visited a jeweller. What happened instead was that she said something about the grey of the hills that was so precisely accurate and so completely her, the specific quality of how she saw things, that he set down the cup of tea he was holding and said, "Marry me." She turned from the painting. She looked at him. "The hills are the wrong shade," she said. "I know. Marry me. I have paint on my hands." "I have noticed. Marry me." She looked at her hands, then at him, then at the hills on the canvas. "Yes," she said, "but the hills are still wrong. I'll change the hills. You don't paint. I'll learn." She smiled, the full, real smile that he had been collecting since September. "No, you won't." "No," he agreed, "I won't. But I will sit here while you change them, and I will have a very strong opinion about when they are right. You always have very strong opinions. You always disagree with them. And I am always right. Occasionally." She set down her brush. She crossed the studio. She stood in front of him with the paint-stained hands and the Dorset light behind her and said, "I'm going to say something honest. You always do. Last September, I was standing in the rain and I was in the early stages of understanding that I had nearly lost myself to someone else's idea of what I should be. And then you stopped, and you did not have an idea of what I should be. You had an interest in what I was." She paused. "I have been loved before in the way that wants to shape you. I do not want to be loved that way again." "I know," he said. "I want to be loved in the way that wants to see you, that shows up for the thing that is actually there." "I know," he said again. "That is the only way I know how." She looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she said. She took his hand. The hills remained the wrong shade until March. He did, in fact, have a very strong opinion about when they were right. She told him he was wrong about that too. He conceded, looking at the finished painting, that she had probably been right. They were married in April, in the church at Brow Village, not St Bartholomew's in Hartston, where no one suggested they go, and not London, where William had his practice, but Dorset, where she had her studio and her hills and the rose wall that had done as it pleased for 3 years and that she intended to let continue. It was a small wedding. Her mother, her aunt, her oldest friend. His brother, his partner from the practice, the Yorkshire contractor named Briggs, who had, in the end, conceded the load-bearing wall and had sent a letter of congratulations that was gruff and genuine in equal measure. Mrs. Finch from the Whitmore Coaching Inn was there because Annalise had written to her in January, and Mrs. Finch had written back with the warm, practical efficiency of a woman who approved of things coming right. The day was clear. April in Dorset. The hills the correct shade of green, which was different from the grey of winter, but which he looked at with the same focused attention, and she had already begun to think about how to paint it. She wore the ivory dress, not the wedding dress from September, which had been quietly retired, but a new one, made for a different occasion and a different woman, which was to say, the same woman, more fully herself. She walked in with her mother. She reached William at the end of the aisle. He looked at her with the open, unguarded expression she had come to know as the truest thing about him. The expression that had been there since a September morning when he opened a carriage door because it was raining and it seemed like the obvious thing. "Hello," he said, very quietly, just for her. "Hello," she said. The vicar began. Outside, the Dorset April went about its business. And in the church at Brow, a woman who had stood in the rain on the steps of another church and discovered in the worst moment the beginning of relief, took the hand of the man who had stopped and did not let go. The painting was exhibited in London in October. This had not been planned. It had happened because Lord Aldwych, who was, in the interconnected world of English culture, connected to everything eventually, had seen a canvas at a friend's house in Dorset and had stood in front of it for a long time, and then asked quietly who had painted it. The exhibition was small and carefully curated, and attended by exactly the people Lord Aldwych intended to attend it. The critical response was, in the particular language of the London art world, extraordinary. A new voice, a new eye, a quality of observation that was both technically accomplished and emotionally alive. Annalise attended on William's arm, in the blue dress, with paint under her nails that she had not been able to entirely remove despite considerable effort, and stood in front of her own work in a room full of people encountering it for the first time, and felt, again, the thing she had felt in Lord Aldwich's drawing room when M.H. Gray's identity was revealed, though she did not know that story, only her own version of it. The thing that said, "There, that is done. Now we go forward." The centrepiece of the exhibition was the Dorset Hills. The hills that had been the wrong shade until March. The hills he had sat with her through, developing his strong opinion, conceding eventually that she was right. The hills that were now, on a canvas in a London gallery, exactly the shade of a Dorset September morning, low and pale and slightly uncertain and entirely alive. Someone standing near her said to a companion, "Look at that. Look at the light in it. That painter understands something about how things actually look when you're paying attention." Annalise did not say anything. William, beside her, heard it. She felt the small, private quality of his satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone watching a thing they knew to be true be recognized as true. He said nothing either. He took her hand. They stood in front of the hills. They had been married 6 months. In that time, she had completed 7 paintings, and he had completed the Yorkshire project and begun 2 new ones. And they had argued about architecture and colour and the correct height for a kitchen shelf, and the best route from London to Dorset, and the interpretation of a particular passage in a book they had read simultaneously and disagreed about entirely. They had been very happy. Not in the performed way of happiness that knows it is being observed, in the interior way, the kind that is simply the texture of daily life when daily life is built on the right foundation. Load-bearing walls, he had said once, looking at her across a room in the way he looked at her when he was thinking something he was about to say. "What about them?" she had said. "When they are right," he said, "everything else can be built on top of them." She had looked at him. He had looked at her. Neither of them had said anything further, because neither of them had needed to. In a church in Hartston, in September, in the rain, a woman had stood on the steps of a place she had not needed to be and discovered something she had not expected to discover. And a carriage had slowed on the road, and a man had opened the door, and everything from that moment had been the architecture of what came next. Every conversation and every canvas and every disagreement about grey hills and every Tuesday letter and every Christmas morning and every evening in a studio in the Dorset light. All of it built on the moment someone stopped. That is, in the end, what love is. Not the grand gesture, not the declaration in the rain. Just the stopping, just the opening of the door, just, "You have been standing here long enough. Come in."